Again, I reassert the traditional Gnostic view that the archons are planetary in nature and are not extraterrestrial alien invaders that have hacked the code of our world for self-serving purposes. There's more than enough villainy in the malefic planets to go searching for villains elsewhere. What has me on this line of thought today are 2 points: Stockholm Syndrome and cluster Bs, particularly borderlines. Funny enough, people generally fail to understand borderlines due to the very black and white thinking that borderlines themselves are famous for. Half of people will describe borderlines as kind of cutesy, but extremely passionate, melodramatic, emotional, insecure, needy, kind of manic pixie dream girls. The other half describes them as literally Satan, basically psychopaths that come into relationships with completely selfish motives and causing torture and destruction for basically no reason. The truth is somewhere in between. The thing about borderlines is that they basically have no principles. They're a guide to the world, and everything they do in it is based on their emotions. And their emotions are completely unstable, so it logically follows that they can't possibly ever be trustworthy. They're not psychopathic, because included in their emotions is empathy, which is why they don't just go around doing whatever they want, because they don't want to hurt people. But they are, again, emotionally unstable. And so if they split on you, which they will due to their extreme insecurity and hypersensitivity, they'll view you as all bad, and being guided only by their emotions, this allows them to give themselves permission to do unspeakably horrible things to people that they split on. Borderlines burn through friends like NFT bros burn through their life savings, and usually have an unusually long lifetime list of come and go besties and relationship partners. What usually doesn't get talked about is really how insanely bad and ugly things get when things are ending with people in the event of a split, usually. Borderlines literally go scorched earth. And because they generally don't have principles and only have emotions, now entirely negative ones with the split, it's no holds barred, as they do some of the most evil, horrible things imaginable. These are people that will, like narcissists, create smear campaigns, accuse people of rape and abuse that never did anything come close to that, even to the police, threaten suicide if they think you'll abandon them, cheat on you with your best friend or brother, do shit to get your kids taken away from you. It's super ugly and yeah, super evil. But if you understand the borderline mind, you start to understand. That's the crazy thing about cluster Bs to me. See, you've got mental illness. Like you got schizoaffective disorder is a thing, anxiety, PTSD even. But cluster Bs are so interesting to me because it's so far beyond mental illness. The entire psychological foundation and infrastructure is just completely double fucked and dilapidated. Everything is broken and being held together by duct tape. It's actually a miracle to me that a narcissist or a borderline can function at all when they're so profoundly broken and psychologically underdeveloped. The hypersensitivity of borderlines combined with their destructive and self-destructive habits of mind has created the popular metaphor that having BPD is like being an emotional third-degree burn victim. The need for absolute emotional immersion with another person is all-consuming, and yet due to their own psychological brokenness, the entire venture was doomed from the start. And being doomed from the start was only destined to create even more emotional and psychological burns right on top of their pre-existing ones. It's like, wow, how do borderlines not go completely insane and kill themselves? Well, actually, borderlines have a 10% suicide rate, which is 50 times higher than the average population. But I find that somehow borderlines are able to move from disaster relationship to disaster relationship with an alarming amount of speed and grace. I often wondered why. And the answer I found was simple: pure delusion. The ability for a borderline to lie to themselves about the past, to just rewrite things that happened to make themselves the victim and the other person the villain, never ceases to amaze me. The term borderline itself originally comes from patients exhibiting these symptoms existing on the borderline of psychosis and neurosis, after all. But far more common is borderlines just erasing memories altogether and pretending like stuff didn't happen. Amazingly, they're quite successful at this. Some borderlines I've known in the past have said and done absolutely horrible things, and when you bring it up to them, they're genuinely very surprised and don't remember it even happening. This is a really common BPD thing, actually, if you read around. It feeds into my existing theory that all cluster Bs have entity attachments. Well, in 2026, now we know that almost everyone has entity attachments, but cluster Bs have super entity attachments. Okay, so demons gravitate towards worldliness, trauma, and a lack of self-control. And so with borderlines, they've hit the jackpot, as borderlines generally have some kind of alcohol or substance addiction, hypersexuality and promiscuity issues, relationship addictions, latent narcissistic and attention-seeking tendencies, complete lack of self-accountability and emotional regulation, and of course, childhood and adult trauma out the ass. So yeah, if demons are parasites, then BPDs are crawling with parasites, functioning as a very realistic secondary explanation for their memory loss. And so, as an external observer and a longtime friend of multiple BPD girls, it's been amazing to witness how they move through life as this force of nature, just incinerating everything they touch and moving on like it never happened. It seems Delulu truly is the Solulu, as they say, and yet all of this raises an interesting thought. If karma was a thing, which it's not, borderlines would be swimming in it. They have so much horrible stuff to answer for, so much damage they've caused, and they continue to accrue greater and greater debt because there is no accountability or ability to face themselves. They just run away and project everything they feel elsewhere so they don't have to deal with it. But now we have to put that against what we know, according to our best evidence, about the afterlife. We can't really talk about the so-called archons or reptilian soul recyclers without addressing Michael Newton's Life Between Lives work, because Newton's work is really the main source from which we extrapolate most of this current dialogue about manipulative, evil, loose harvesting entities. Newton's work, primarily featured in Journey of Souls, outlines the typical pattern of the afterlife according to most of his patients. Upon death, occasionally after some time in a bardo state, the individual is greeted with a life review and the presence of their spirit guide to make sense of it. This is the so-called life flashing before your eyes. Generally, the life review has a negative bias, where you're sent into remembrance of the bad things you've done to people in life, and also generally forced to experience snapshots of how those other people felt as a result. Consequently, most people's most immediate experience after death is an overwhelming sense of shame. But just as quickly as the shame bomb came, it's all washed away by the love bomb. Enter the soul family, which guides you into a space of unconditional love and acceptance, so powerful and beautiful that you forget all about how much shame you felt just shortly before. This basically gets you drunk on love and bliss. And sometime after, you encounter the third stage, which is the presence of the Council of Wise Beings, which are a group of robed, wise, light beings that gently discourse with you about your failures in life and how they can be corrected in the next life. In other words, these Council of Wise Beings helps plan your next life's reincarnation and the events you'll experience under the subtext of some kind of soul evolution or a correction of the events of your past life and some lives before. You're given some time to rest after that, According to most sources, it's the equivalent of somewhere between a couple months and 3 years. And then you re-enter a kind of line to clock in to your next life. And then they ship you back down to the happiest place on Earth, the planet Earth. So understanding that this is a real evidential work by Michael Newton, providing real evidence for what most people encounter after death, with a huge sample size of credible data to work from this groundwork of evidence, many layer a conspiracy theory on top of this evidence, purporting that every character you'd just encountered, from the spirit guide to the soul family to the council of wise beings, were all just demonic reptilian sort of parasite archons who basically shamed your whole existence during the life review, got you drunk on love and bliss in the soul family reunion, and then manipulated you into choosing destructive and traumatic circumstances for your next life for the reptilian purposes of releasing Loosh, which is purported to be their energy source, when you were discussing with the Council of Wise Beings. Like my accurate stance on borderlines, again, I find myself somewhere in the middle. Yes, things are not as they seem. The beings you encounter in the tunnel of white light are not successfully producing soul evolution like they claim they are. And no, these beings aren't loosh-maxing or optimizing the release of energy through trying to con you into the worst possible reincarnation soul package. And here's some food for thought for only a part of why I say that. Again, back to borderlines. Their entire life is full of shameful and horrible deeds that they live in denial of and mindfuck themselves to forget. Once that life review hits, imagine how that feels for a borderline. There's so much to work from. Even for a normal dude, these life reviews are so overwhelmingly negative. But for a borderline, can you imagine? Each slide on that slideshow is just one Mike Tyson punch to the gut after another. The shame produced would be all-consuming. It only takes one life of being a borderline to put that soul in the position of utmost vulnerability before the Council of Wise Beings. Imagine you're the Council of Wise Beings, okay? And the soul of this borderline has just had their entire world rocked when they realized that all along they've been a total horrible piece of shit. And it's only now that they truly realize the insanely horrible, destructive, torturous, agonizing impact they've had on all the people around them. Now, let's pretend you're this evil, loosh-harvesting Archon reptilian cabal. What do? Okay? Role-playing. I know what I do. I gently, and with a sense of unconditional love, convince them to experience even more fucked up, horrible things that are way worse than even being a borderline. A soul that vulnerable, you could easily convince them to be chained up in some basement and psychologically tortured their whole life and tell them that it's somehow balancing some karma or teaching some kind of lesson on empathy or something. It'd be an absolute loosh feast. And yet, realistically, this is a very rare thing that happens, this level of torture. But the presence of borderlines and cluster B disordered people is much larger. Well, the numbers don't really add up, do they? This doesn't really look like optimized looshing. There's so much more we can do to cluster Bs. The ostensible karmic debt is so high. So we can loosh them so much and give them such a bad deal, and they'll take it. But this kind of Epstein Island stuff, I mean, yes, it's horrible, but it's comparatively extremely rare to the experience of the average population. And yes, extremely rare even compared to the amount of cluster B disordered people. So really what you see is an amazing amount of restraint on the part of these so-called reptilians. Why aren't they going for broke? Why aren't they going for the big loosh? It'd be like taking candy from a baby. And on another note, we know about Stockholm Syndrome, right? A life review is a very powerful propaganda tool, especially combined with memory wiping. We could easily continue to make almost everyone something like a cluster B and then make them spiral down into more and more painful life situations that cause pain on others and create yet another argument to send them deeper and deeper into more pain. And the shame of each life review could continuously make them keep blaming themselves and siding with their captors, us, the reptilian archons. And yet, this doesn't really happen. I guess my overall point is there's so much more these supposed demonic reptilians could be doing, and yet they're not. And why? Now, all that was scripted, so this is the part where I got to start riffing off the dome here. But yeah, all of that is absolutely true. As someone who looks at natal charts, I've spent a good amount of my life looking at natal charts. I don't see from an astrological perspective a large amount of support for the idea that all of us here are undergoing a con job that is convincing us to put ourselves into traumatic situations that are optimal for the release of emotional energy. To an extent, you could argue, this is a concept I call the architectural Time Lord. This goes back to my video, Ficino's Broken Universe. And really back to my original point of really we should lean a little bit further away from the extraterrestrial invader angle and a little bit more towards the traditional Gnostic view of planetary archons, because it really does seem that Time Lords are a really big factor here. In fact, when something happens on this world, it's usually according to the astrology, meaning astrology is usually the most accurate guide for things that happen. So something that's kind of rare, if you think about it, is it's rare to see demonic and extraterrestrial activity that creates traumatic situations from which loosh to be extracted that is not in conformance with the astrology, right? So this could mean one of two things. One, there really was no extra astrological factor. There never was some extraterrestrials that are operating outside of whatever astrology was dictating to happen. Or conversely, this could mean that these extraterrestrial invaders, some describe it as like a hijacked code of our world, they may disguise themselves and hide themselves in the astrology. Because in my experience, the sort of lashing out that I get, the sort of demonic attacks that I get, they tend to conform to astrological patterns, to be completely honest. One of the biggest I found in my own life, this may just be my personal astrology of things, is on a day-to-day basis, I have to be careful about Mars entering the position of the descendant. When Mars crosses the descendant, I find that I get what I would consider to be a kind of demonic attack. In my opinion, malefics kind of just propagate possession naturally. Now, certainly, there is a traditional support for this idea. Vettius Valens, who's one of the seminal Hellenistic astrologers, directly links possession as a signification of Saturn. Haven't really seen it so much with Mars, but we can kind of extrapolate a little bit, you know? I think that possession has as much to do with Mars as it does with Saturn. I think it's just kind of a malefic sort of thing. But yeah, you know, I look around at the world and me being, you know, how do I say? If I try to put my supervillain hat on and I try to like scheme and strategize ways to optimize Lucian, I mean, let's just take a second and think about how easily diluted our world can be, right? Think about if you're on this channel and you're listening to me, you're already in like the top like 1% of like understanding of things. And you must be aware of how like profoundly delusional and blind most people are, how many distortions they believe. Um, I'm about to shit on Christianity again. Think think about how mind fucked you have to be to read through the Bible start to finish and be like, yeah, that makes sense. You know, it's got like tens of thousands of internal contradictions. The character of God himself is a fucking like bipolar lunatic. It just doesn't make sense. And people believe all kinds of things that don't make sense, including Christianity as is generally practiced. The most people are just mad, gullible, simple, superficial. They don't have the critical thinking skills necessary. I describe them as hylics. They look outward for consensus reality, and they just adopt it. Point is, people are just so easily fooled and manipulated. Um, Understanding that people are so easily fooled and manipulated, why, if Loosh is the goal, are we not taking this so much further? 1984, think about the society of 1984, you know? The society in 1984, I can't remember the name of the damn nation that was in that story, but the citizens of that nation were not. It's not like they acted like they did out of a sense of like complete fear for their authoritarian regime. They genuinely were easily deluded into adopting that way of doing things. They had like what was it, like the 5 minute rage where they all get together and just like just easily so manipulated. Um, that's that Orwell's portrait of society, a kind of dystopian sort of view, is not too far off from a possibility in our world. The gullibility, that's the thing, is that there's no minimal critical thinking among the populace. What's much more common is that they look outward for consensus reality. So all it takes is just a few pushes from these reptilian archons, and we could have a world that looks like 1984. We could be there much faster. Why the beating around the bush here? You know what I mean? And more importantly, look how easily these entities get us to blame ourselves. Look at how easily they get us to blame ourselves. It's not that hard. If I'm able to sit you down, you are immediately freshly out of the astral or into the astral from your physical body. You're like, whoa, what's going on? And I show you a slideshow of of your epic fails, you know what I mean? America's Saddest Home Videos of how you've been a complete fuck up your entire life, where I selectively only show the bad things with maybe a few good things sprinkled in between. Um, and we plan your next lifetime and memory wipe it again. And now I'll show you a slideshow of your past 200 lifetimes doing the same thing. How quickly do you think that with that level of power and influence, understanding that the average person views this, the entities we find in this tunnel of white light as God or angels, how quickly do you think it would be before we blame ourselves? The power that these entities hold is amazing. It's amazing the ability that they wield, that they could use to have us mind fuck ourselves into choosing bad deals. They could easily turn this into a self-flagellating sort of thing, and they could set up. I mean, just have some creativity. People call this a hell realm. I had a friend, by the way, a BPD girl, who called this world hell. And I hear this all the time, and I'm like, you have little imagination. You have little imagination. Have more of a diabolical mind. You know, when I was in high school, they made us do a project on Dante's Inferno. You had to create your own Dante's Inferno with all the circles and the punishments that are associated with it. And then the teacher read them off anonymously, and then they got to my project, my series of circles of hell and the punishment associated with it, and everyone in the class is like, "Oh my God, whoever wrote this is disturbed." And I'm like, "Yeah, kinda." But I mean, shit, have some imagination. You know, it could be so much worse. Which is not to say that what's happening here isn't bad. It's totally fucking bad. But have some imagination of how much worse it could be and how much more optimized the Lucian can be. You know, I'm thinking of Rick and Morty right now. Remember that episode of Rick and Morty where evil Rick created a dome of Mortys where they're all being like stabbed in the side, and the energy released from like the sheer like terror and trauma of all the Mortys was like powering his superdome. I mean, shit, it could be like that. It could literally be like that. And when you have the power to, you have the power of memory wipes, and you have the power of selective life reviews, and not to mention, what do? People look outward for consensus reality. So all around you are these loving, like, yes, it's okay. This is just something we do. We go down to earth, and then we get tortured as Mortys by evil Rick. It's just what we do. It's out of love to learn less. You know, the average person would be like, that sounds right. You're right. I was a bad boy. You know, Tony Sayers. I love Tony Sayers. He's one of like the soul trap YouTubers, and he's like, yeah, you know, you got to go back down there and you got to reincarnate as a rape victim with your arms and legs blown off because you got into an argument with Bob in 1975 and you made him sad. You know, that shit literally could work, especially when you're looking at these beings as in your soul. You got your soul family right there. You got these what you see as angels and what you see as God. Whatever particular religion that you believe in, you see the key figures there, and the whole squad is here, and you're in the center of the room. Everybody's around you. They're all telling you, yeah, do this. You know, you did all these things. It's the right thing to do. Go back down there. And since the average person's a fucking Heilig that depends on consensus reality, my question is, with all of this context, why do we not live in a world of evil Rick stabbing Mortys as a dome in the side of your torso? You know what I mean? Why is that? We could totally mind fuck these souls, dude. We could totally mind fuck these souls. We already make them blame themselves. We already do that. Michael Newton's work, that's included in the evidence of Michael Newton's work. He describes the afterlife as a place of profound accountability. Every one of these spirits gets us to blame ourselves for the things that we did in life. And another thing too, I'm kind of arguing both sides here, right? I'm arguing it's not demonic invasion. And by the way, I do separate demons and archons, two different things. By my estimation, it seems that what a lot of people associate with demons are actually related to the malefics. They are related to Saturn and Mars generally. And what was I talking about? Oh yeah, the archons. Again, the motivations are different. The malefic planets, in isolation, they only want. Okay, so we need a context too. It's not just the malefic planets. I've talked about in my text posts how no planet has one fixed nature. They're not archetypes. This is something a lot of people get wrong. The planets are not archetypes. They're constantly, mutably changing characters. In the same way that who you were 20 years ago is not who you are now, the way the planets are changes as they move from sign to sign. It's a real thing. And so the malefics, when they're in their signs of dignity, it actually starts to resemble a little bit more of what the sort of fluffy, sunshine and rainbows way modern astrology depicts the malefic planets like Saturn and Mars. Like Saturn as like a disciplinarian teacher, and kind of like your own personal David Goggins. It's like that like whips your hand with the ruler to get you to do the right things. Yeah, there is something of that in, say, Saturn and Capricorn, a sign of essential dignity. Saturn Peregrine is not that way. Saturn Peregrine literally, so that is to say in 75% of signs, like only 25% of signs are signs of essential dignity for Saturn. That's Libra, Aquarius, and Capricorn. Any other sign, Saturn is only destructive and it's only a corrupter and a defiler of things. So I see where some people get these archetypes of planets that are kind of malefic planets that are, positive and helpful, but they just don't really exist outside of essential dignity usually. So yeah. My original point was the archons, on the other hand, seem to represent a holistic unity of all the planetary influences. This is why, again, Gnosticism associates the archons with the planets, planetary jailers. So the traditional Gnosticism tells us. And as a whole, as a holistic unity, there is an outward movement towards storytelling. Because as a whole, this entire system is what I call the demiurge. You can find the demiurge right there in the tunnel of light. It's where the demiurgeness is most concentrated. It's like people think of the demiurge as like you gotta like clean your glasses and take a close look at the magnifying glass out. It's like, oh, okay, there's the fucking lion with the snake bottom to it. It's like, no, the demiurge is a system. The demiurge is not a guy. The demiurge is a system. And it's actually found at all levels of reality. And it's an outward manic desire, an outward focused manic desire for stories to be told. Now here's the deception, because it is deceptive. That's part of my point, is it's not pure malefica. Now part of malefica is harvesting. I mean, Saturn is the sickle of Cronus. Saturn traditionally has endless associations with harvesting and farming. The world is a loosh farm. But the thing is, the world is not just malefic. It's not just a hell realm like people say. There are benefic animating forces to our world and mediating luminaries. And altogether, all of these planetary influences, which are, by the way, are always shifting Time Lords. It's not a fixed group of entities you encounter between lives constantly. It's a shifting astral landscape, just as the zodiac and the planets are a shifting astral landscape. They are not focused on just destruction. Demons are focused on destruction and causing damage. Demons seem to be related to peregrine, malefic planets in the spirits that come with them. Which again points to, due to our current epidemic of entity attachment, seems to point towards a malefic Time Lord of some kind that we may not necessarily see in the simple transit astrology. Maybe something like Arabic lots on a world basis. Like that would be the invisible astrology, because there's so much astrology. We only know, I believe that the astrology we have is like an iceberg. I believe the astrology that we use is like the tip of an iceberg. Just as an example, for the past like 100, more than that, hundreds of years, we've been doing astrology without the context of astrology as it was originally given to us. We literally were like playing with the bones we dug up of astrology. It's only like in the past 10 years, 15 years that we got that we were revived and restored zodiacal releasing, and zodiacal releasing alone like doubles the complexity and depth of astrology. So imagine all the astrology that is not accounted for. But altogether, it does overwhelmingly produce a large amount of evidence for the idea that we exist in a clockwork type structure of reality where everything is mostly predictable. Yeah, it's only the peregrine malefics that are this demonic, destructive force, it seems, and that their motivation is defilement and trauma and harvesting energy. The motivation of the demiurge as a unified whole of the motivations of all the planets, which are the Gnosticism, the archontic jailers, is very different. Now there is a deception, like I said. The deception is of the tunnel of white light is that there is some kind of soul evolution taking place. This is an idea that I can test. The presence of the malefics does seem to disprove this altogether, because the benefic planets, Ficino's three graces of the Sun, Venus, and Jupiter, they themselves restore and perfect things. And so when we come into a point of our lives where we gain a profound amount of self-mastery, it usually coincides with a pronounced period of influence of these three graces of Sun, Venus, or Jupiter. And the corruption, the fall, the downfall of your life is also predictable. The point is, it's all pretty friggin' predictable. So because the downfall is actually represented in the predictive astrology of our lives, it means that there can really never be constant evolution closer and closer to a final stage. Instead, there's just a waxing and waning. So that's a deception. And the true motivation, they tell us it's soul evolution. It's not. The soul trap people say it's looshmaxing. I think I just made a really compelling argument for why it's not. Altogether, it seems that the true motivation is storytelling. I believe that the demiurge, and the demiurge again is not one character, it is all of these characters. It is the spirit guide, it is the soul family, and it is the council of wise beings. It is the planets and the spheres. They are driven by a demiurgic impulse towards consciousness having a first person experience of multiple stories where there are challenges and highs and lows and downfalls. This is going to be the subject of a future video that I'm working on, so I'm not going to get too deep into it, but a correction of the idea of our demonic spirit guides. Not demonic? No. Not angelic either, and not entirely trustworthy. They are deceptive. The demiurge is an addict for storytelling. Is an addict for storytelling. And this addiction is so strong. Now, if you think about the behavior of some of these spirits that we encounter, how many here, raise your hand if you encounter monitoring spirits? These people that are just watching, they just want to watch you. They're just like slack-jawed watching you. I get watchers all the time. People just watching me. I think this is very demiurgic. The demiurge is a desire to observe a story taking place. And so people that are especially demiurgic, let's say, that are especially hylic, they find themselves distanced from the main character energy. They find themselves more so viewers of the storytelling. And I think this is the real demiurgic consequences, is that when you live so much in outwardness, you become an obsessive viewer of people with the divine spark. The divine spark is what's real and what is connected to real personality. Real personality. When you become very demiurgic, everything becomes quite fantasy. Everything becomes quite fake. It's storytelling. It's fantasy. The way the average person talks down here on Earth, it's like everybody is literally playing a character. They're not being authentic, but they're playing a character and they're putting on a show, and the way the entire thing unfolds, it unfolds as if literally it's like a TV show or a movie or something. Like everything is so scripted. I think that's my point. Everything is so scripted, and there is a disconnection from like authenticity and like realness. And I think this is because there is a distance from the divine spark, but there is an attraction to storytelling. And so because the demiurgic impulse contains an attraction to storytelling, but in its distance from what is real and absolute, which is the one, what you get are your Netflix viewers. What you get are your cucks who just sit around and watch people that are actual main characters, people that have a divine spark. Pneumatics, some people would say. They're more wrapped up in my story. which is fascinating because I'm mad fucking boring. But still, they're wrapped up in my story, and they want you to be wrapped up in a story. You know, like this new framework that I'm discussing, that I haven't heard anybody else frame it this way. Things really start to line up a lot better than just the pure, well, the Christian framework. The Christian framework tracks so fucking horribly. Like, the accuracy is so poor. The loose harvesting demon parasite framework doesn't really track either. There's a lot of holes in that. There's so many ways that it goes against how things work. It doesn't intuitively make sense or logically make complete sense. But this storytelling framework, demiurgic versus monadic setup, to me actually tracks the best. There is a malefic Time Lord at this time, so there is a negative tinge to our Hylics. A Hylic is not a demonic person. It's not a Matrix Agent Smith evil, kind of guy. A Hylic is one that has surrendered to the demiurgic impulse, which is the impulse towards outwardness and the storytelling of outwardness. And in living in outwardness, they have severed their connection to the so-called divine spark, which means they've severed their connection to what's real and actual, real main character energy. And now they can't help but behave in ways that kind of come off like skits. They can't help but be nothing but a persona that likes to group up with other people, and all together their personas all collaborate to create skits that are performative and actually seek the attention of people that are pneumatic, people that have a divine spark and have a real connection. Because without the observer, the pneumatic observer, everything they do feels empty. So this is what I find, is that I find groups of people around me putting on little shows just for me. And I see them kind of looking to the side to see if I'm paying attention. And I'm like, bro, I could not care less about what the fuck they're talking about. But they need my attention. They need it. They need a real observer, because they're so distant from the real observer. What is the real observer? Consciousness itself. They're so far from pure consciousness, and so much data and so much programming, so much story, right? So much storytelling, that there is an eros of opposition. This is something I'm going to get into in my next video. This eros, this attraction to what is missing. And what's missing is a real observer, real consciousness, purer consciousness, just purer consciousness that's not the conditioned mind. They want some unconditioned, pure, conscious observer to interact with their skits and data and programming and stories and personas and characters, the storytelling, to give it life. Because if there is no divine spark there, it feels lifeless. It feels like, why are we even having this conversation? It feels empty. So fascinatingly, just the presence of a pneumatic person actually gives life to this fake behavior. Anyways, I think that's all for this video. Um, yeah, it's really interesting how these so-called demonic reptiles are so merciful. It's so interesting to me that they wield so much power. I mean, think about it. The ability to force you to watch a PowerPoint presentation of all the ways you fucked up, and the ability to shapeshift into all your loved ones, to shapeshift into gods and all this. They talk about they're scared of our power. Maybe, but that's an incredible power that they have over us. And I'm amazed at how much I'm amazed at how much they reserve their abuse of this power. I'm amazed by this. I'm amazed by this so much that honestly I disbelieve in the thesis altogether. I do not believe in a demonically infested astral realm. I believe it's subtler than that. I believe instead it's demiurgic. Demiurgic is not to be confused with demonic. Not the same. Demiurgic insists on storytelling, an addiction to storytelling. And since it's an addiction, they'll go to desperate measures to keep you immersed in this storytelling. Demiurgic includes success stories. Demiurgic includes rising above negative circumstances and healing and restoration. That's a good story. Listen, this is going to be a subject of a future video, but nobody wants to read. Okay, there's two kinds of stories nobody wants to read. First story is Jen went to the market and got some bananas. She loves those bananas. They're so super tasty. She went home and made a banana pie and watched Ellen. Ellen is her favorite show. It was a really nice day. No bad things happened. Then she went to the park, and it was really nice. Nobody wants to read that fucking book, okay? Number two, nobody wants to read a book that's just completely just hellish, where there's nothing but torture. Nobody wants to read that book either. I find that our world is much more dynamic and much more interesting than that. And I believe the reason this is that the demiurge is not demonic, Lush Harvester. One of its faces is absolutely, arguably demonic and a energy harvester, and those are the malefic faces of the demiurge. What they call Satan. Saturn is not to be underestimated in what this is. I mean, people associate Saturn with Satan, and I say I have no objection to that. I have no objection to that. Like, the malefics are that bad. They are that villainous. But they have to be. And we can stack this villainy. It's cycles inside of cycles, inside of cycles, inside of cycles. Remember, the astrology we have is only the tip of the iceberg. So what would it look like? Imagine, if you will, if we took our current transit astrology and put that inside of another cycle that we don't even know about, okay? And let's say that we make all of the Saturn's peregrine, we make them all line up, and we make them all Time Lords. Now the world can start looking way more hellish than we could possibly imagine, but it's always cyclical. I forgot what my point is, but I think you get the point, right? Storytelling. The demiurge is a storyteller. It likes rises and falls. It likes dynamic changes. It likes sudden twists. It likes redemption. and it likes downfalls. We could see it in the pure astrology. We have an ascendant and a midheaven, the apex, and we have a descendant, the beginning of a downfall, and then we have what's called the nadir, Imam Coeli, which is the downfall, the rock bottom. We're gonna get into that in the next video, the next Kali Yuga Tea Time, which is about the hero's journey and the eros of oppositions. Thank you for watching today, and okay, let's think of something witty here. Take a look. It's in a book. Reading Rainbow.